All right, so hi everybody. I never quite said, but my name's Ross. And Tim invited me to give a talk, which I'm happy to do. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because it's, this is kind of a summary of like a lot of the stuff I believe and a lot of the volunteer time I put into different groups, whether it's local or broader than that. And so I just thought, hey, I'm gonna see if I can make the case for why a community of secular people, of non-believing people, or whatever label we'll talk about, the many different labels we can use, is useful, is important. I'll actually make my sermon actually in that shot. So, what's the plan? What am I going to talk about? So first I'm going to say, hey, who is this guy talking to you? I'm also going to talk about the state of the secular community as I see it. Now, of course, this is all filtered through me, right? I've got my biases, what I see and what I don't. So this is just my perspective, but I'll try to give as broad of a picture, and as comprehensive a picture as possible. Then I'll talk about, well, I guess the point of this whole thing is the actual importance of it. So I'm going to talk about, hey, where are we at, and then why do these things exist? Why do we want to keep having these groups? And then afterwards, how can we grow? Where are good places that at least I think that we can move into to kind of keep this community growing and get more people into it and make more people happy, educated, aware, all sorts of positive things. And then afterwards, we can talk, and I've got some questions that maybe we'll start conversations. And y'all are welcome to fill in gaps on stuff I miss. So who am I? Well, I'm Ross. It was on the first slide. Anyway, I was raised loosely Christian, and I became a passionate atheist, and I use that in quotes because that sometimes just means I was kind of a jerk sometimes. While I was at Georgia Tech, and then in my last couple of years, I joined this group. This was like 2010, 2011, 2012, and then after I got a lot of enjoyment out of that, and then a couple of years after I graduated and I started working at GTRI. Just right on campus. I, still had a lot of friends there. Some of y'all are here right now, and said, hey, let's keep meeting. We had these, weekly trivia nights that went for, I don't know, maybe like a full year, and it was real simple. You just go out, eat pizza, and fail to answer a bunch of questions about Star Wars, and it's fine. But that, I think that's maybe a small example of my passion for this thing is just a simple, beat, oh, this is a thing that we can reliably go to that's fun. And then now I spend a lot of my time volunteering for for Sunday Assembly Atlanta. Being an organizer, planning these events. Sunday Assembly Atlanta is jokingly called Atheist Church. It's a lot more than that. There's a big monthly assembly where you have a speaker and music, live music. Icebreakers, getting people to talk to each other. There's food afterwards. So this might start sounding like a church service. That's a little bit what it's like. Then there's all these other small group things that you do outside of it that has nothing to do with that. And I think that it's a really important thing that we're providing. And then there's some pictures. So you might notice some folks in that top right one. That's one of the board game nights from a year or so ago. That middle picture is from the Sunday Assembly International Conference in 2015 that took place in Atlanta. That we hosted, and that's what made me go, okay, I want to spend more time and try to build this up. It's just a bunch of really cool people that want to, provide spaces for non-believing people. And then I don't know who that guy was, but he just kind of showed up, and we took a picture. And anyway, it was really uncomfortable, and he was really weird. Of course, that's Tim, and that was at the Reason Rally, where we saw each other. Oh, and I'm actually wearing that Matt Dillahunty shirt in that shot too. So, what is the state of the secular community? I feel like I'm Obama talking about the State of the Union, but we'll see. So, who composes the secular community? I think it's a good place. It's a good thing to ask. What is secularism, and who's a part of it? So in some definitions of secularism, right? It just means without religion, without pertaining to religion, whether it's government, whether it's music. It could be a lot of different things. And for this purposes of this conversation, I'm mostly using it to describe a giant umbrella over all of those different groups, right? Atheist, agnostic, non-believer, non-religious, freethinker, spiritual. I never know what that means, but I'm including it. None, anti-theist, ex-Mormon, ex-Christian, ex-Muslim, secular, skeptic, rational, critical thinker. All of these people, to varying degrees, might ascribe themselves to be under this banner, or at least they have enough, the Venn diagrams of all these groups and their priorities and their values and their passions overlap enough that I think that you can cohesively, refer to them by this single label, for better or worse. We could talk for a long time about what the best label is, and perhaps it's slightly evident that, a very common refrain for the secular community is that it's like herding cats, where a lot of people have different priorities, and I think that's evident in the number of different labels that we all use. We aren't super united on everything. And so people have different priorities. Some people want to, volunteer. Some people want to be activists. Some people just want to go drink in a bar. So there's a bunch of different priorities. And I think one of the big questions is how do we meet those multidimensional what different people want to do? How do we allow everyone to kind of be able to get what they want out of this community? So where's the secular community right now? There are a ton of organizations around the world, and again, there's different categories like activism, education, just simple old socializing, and a lot more. So I'm just putting up here, these are a list of groups that are just in Atlanta and around in Georgia, sourced from a website called atlantasecular.com that a friend of mine hosted, and I just made a simple WordPress site that just puts all the events of all these things up in one spot. I think it's no surprise to secular people that I think we're all pretty well aware that the secular community is just growing and growing, right? More and more people are leaving religion, and our community can be the people that receive them and say, hey, no, you're welcome, come on in, be a part of this with us, and so many of these groups came up in the 80s, 90s, and in recent years. I do a lot of stuff with Sunday Assembly. That didn't exist until the end of 2013. It's brand new. I think Atlanta Free Thought Society, I think they're maybe in the 80s, I forget. These groups have not been around forever. Secularism, the concepts, and some of these institutions have been around for a very, very long time, but a lot of it is new, and a lot of it is growing. And yeah, even further pointing to how big this is becoming, it's a lot of these groups, Secular Coalition for Georgia is a part of Secular Coalition for America. Sunday Assembly is a part of an international group. There are many free thought societies all over the place. Atlanta Skeptics is a part of a larger group of skeptics in the pub and skeptics groups in all sorts of cities. And of course the Secular Student Alliance, you all know about that, right? They're all over the country too. They're doing providing support for campus groups all over the place. So this thing is big. So why is this important? Who cares? Why should anyone care about this? So I think we have to start with just assuming that we all agree that community is actually useful, right? That's a whole another long conversation. But hopefully we can, if you're coming to a Campus Free Thinkers event, maybe you value community a little bit, right? At least. And I can just point to okay, we're apes. We evolved to be social creatures. That's perhaps reason enough or evidence enough about how important it is to be building community, maintaining friendships, not isolating yourself. That's what community is about. And you build these things without even thinking about it. When I play a video game, and if I'm in a clan or if I'm in a group that's playing a game, that's like a little micro community. Maybe it lasts for one match. Maybe it lasts for years. These are all different forms of community for any different activity you're doing. Even in a class, right? When you're in a classroom, that's a kind of community because you're banding together to try to defeat your professor, maybe. So then you can ask, okay, what is a community of people for, right? I had these 4 bullet points. They kind of came to my mind. Having your perspective understood, establishing a safe, supportive space, appreciating shared values, and learning and growing. And you could value those to different degrees, and I'm sure there's a lot more you could say about what community is for. But I think these are important tenets to keep in mind when we're talking about why is the secular community important, and why why we should care about building these things and allowing them to grow, and care about what weaknesses and strengths there are currently. And yeah, this last bullet point I don't want to underemphasize. You can have communities that are based on oh, I like to go hiking, or I like to do crochet, or I like to play a video game. But what could be a more important community to build than one that's based on like foundational understanding of the universe? You know, not every person that's secular, you know, ascribes to a critical thinking, rational, logical, you know, means, or they came to that conclusion from that. But I mean, I think for a lot of us, valuing reason and evidence, you know, and not valuing like faith or arguments that aren't based in evidence, that's like one of the most basic tenets for like building upon so many other things about us. I think that's a really strong foundation to build a community. And then that's just a picture from Sunday Assembly's meditation group, where, I mean, clearly they're not meditating at that moment, they're like laughing their ass off, but like that's what it can be about. Just as simple as like people get together and they do something, and it's fun because it's fun to be around people. So I got a couple examples here, some like maybe like use cases, just to kind of build out the case for like why a secular community is important. You know, a very common one is like, I just want to blow off steam. I am surrounded by religious people, you know, when I go to work, when I'm doing all these things, and I just want a space where I can go to a bar and just talk, like de-stress. You know, that's a really common sentiment, and that's totally valid. You know, secular individuals have religion forced on them, you know, by their government or in some other manner. That's the secular community can respond to that by being like having activist groups. Secular Coalition for America, Freedom from Religion Foundation. These are groups that do just that. You know, fans of science want to learn. A lot of secular communities, like a lot of what they do with, like for example, Atlanta Skeptics. You know, half of their events are we just go hang out in a bar, and the other half is we go like we bring someone in and they listen to a lecture on some science topic. You know, I think secular people often want to are lifelong learners that want to learn things, and that's that's a really common type of event that can be provided. You know, maybe a religious person misses the church community, and this is one that like not everybody's super cool with, and I get it, and I'll talk about that. But if you were super enmeshed in your religious community, church, you know, temple, mosque, anything, if that was really important to you, and then you fall out of it, and you don't feel like you can be a part of that anymore, that's a huge thing you just lost, and that is something that we should not ignore. That's something we should kind of embrace and kind of grapple with and say, hey, I think we might want to provide for these people in the way that they need. And then the ones on the right are kind of, they're smaller cases, but I think they're also really, really important. You know, support groups are super, super important because, you know, maybe for some of y'all, deconverting was no big deal, or you were never raised in religion, and that's fine. But for some people, that's a tough thing to go through. I mean, like Catholic guilt is like a huge thing, right? You know, a lot of religions, just realizing that you know there might not be a heaven, or losing that fear of hell. Like these are tough things that require like conversations, and that's what a secular community can do. We can have these intimate conversations, whether it's one-on-one, in person, you know, online, whatever, to help people transition and not necessarily push them into something, but just help them try to answer some questions and like resolve these things. You know, I wanted to toss out praise for the Clergy Project. You know, there are religious leaders who lose their religion, and they don't have, it's not so simple, right? They spend their whole life on this career path, and then if you, just by accident or just by reading the wrong book you might, you know, lose your literal faith in what you're doing, and then you don't necessarily have a lot of options. You know, if you spent, are you raising your hand? Or you just stretch it? What's that?
I just wanted to know if you heard about Adam Mann at the recent Freedom from Religion Foundation conference. The guy who was going under the pseudonym Adam Mann gave a talk there because he was a closeted member of the Clergy Project for a very long time, and he actually decided finally to come out and reveal his actual name, which I can't remember. But there's a whole hour-long thing where he talks about it. It's really cool what they do.
Yeah, I mean, like,
it's literally for those who don't know about the Clergy Project, it is literally for people who are currently members of the clergy who are pastors and priests who lose their belief in their own religion and don't know where they can turn to, don't know how to transition into a different job.
Yeah.
And they can contact the Clergy Project anonymously and get help and support from them.
Yeah. It's so important. Like that's one of the most like significant transitions. I talked about if you had a lot of friends and family in the faith community. Well, if also your livelihood was dependent on being in there too, like we as the secular community have to think about how do we bring those people in and take care of them. Like this is a really significant transition and a problem that we need to think long and hard about. And I think the Clergy Project is an excellent step towards. And I don't know how long it's been around. Several years at least, because I think several years ago was the first person who kind of came out and said I was a member of this, or I am a member of this, and here's my name. I'm public about it.
Yeah, that's quite a few members right now who are still preaching weekly,
yeah.
Even though they don't believe what they're preaching,
they
because
may
they're
never
afraid.
leave.
They don't know where to go.
Yeah, I'm not sure what their exact charter is, but I assume that it's okay if they never actually stop. Like if there really isn't a choice, if there isn't a way, and you just need a space to say, I had to preach about this thing I don't believe, and it really hurt, and they just talk about that. Like that can be enough. Providing that space can be enough. And just this last one. There are some. I don't know if it gets as bad as violence is being threatened upon anyone in the U.S. You could certainly be kicked out of your home. For it already happens for the LGBT community, right? But I think it also happens for the secular community. If you're young and your parents are not fans of who you are or what you happen to believe. But if you're facing significant consequences, threats of violence, something like that, the secular community, especially online, can be an anonymous way to voice those opinions, get the support, talk about strategies for what to do, and maybe nothing comes of that except that it kind of clears your mind, let you able to kind of continue on your way. What's up?
There's also a subreddit, Secular Safe House, I think, which is for people who have been kicked out of their home and are looking for a place to stay as they try to figure out things. So you can volunteer your house for a week or so to someone who's in your area and is homeless right now.
I did not know that. That's really cool. So that's the kind of thing where it's like, that is a gap in my knowledge that I'm really happy to know exists.
I think there's also a website that handles that kind of thing.
Yeah.
For that, you need to, because it also deals with minors, you need to be like a licensed person for that.
Yeah. So going on the people who have left religion but kind of want part of that again. Some people want or appreciate a service-like event, and I just want to address that a lot of people are super averse to that, and I get it. I totally get it. Some people, what I'm talking about is if you had positive experiences in your church, in your mosque, or your religious institution, and you got a lot out of sitting with a group of people, singing in unison, having someone inform you of something, whether it's a lecture, a sermon, something like that. If that's something you're used to and you get value out of that, just because a bunch of us in the community are like, I don't want that, doesn't mean that we can kind of ignore that. I think that's a need that's out there, and I think there are more communities that are coming up right now, and I think Sunday Assembly is an example of that. That values accepts that and says, okay, let's work with that, and what can we do in a secular way that can provide that similar experience. So I just want to say, I hear you if you don't like that, and it's okay. You never have to go to one of these things. You will not be forced into one of these things. But that doesn't mean that we ignore it or don't think about it or actively push against it. And I think something that might appeal to the anti-theists in the crowd is just which at times I consider myself that too, is why would we cede all this ground to churches or to religious institutions? They do a lot of stuff right. They get a lot of stuff right, and it's kind of just like a wasted opportunity, like to not use the lessons that they learned about how to, motivate people to do things, how to make people happy, how to build a community, and how to like structure an event. Simple stuff like that. That just because it's like, well, I think a church used that once, let's never do it. Like, come on, there's so much useful stuff that comes from that. So, religion does some stuff very, very right, and we can do the same thing. We just need to make it positive, ethical, accurate, and ours. Baby bathwater, etc. So, basically, what I'm trying to say is, and again, spoilers for seasons 4 and 5 of The Walking Dead. This is a sign that was in those seasons, that was all over Georgia, and it basically said, sanctuary for all, community for all, those who arrive survive. And all the main characters, they all find these signs and they coalesce in this one spot, Terminus, the old name for Atlanta, even though that looks like it's in Macon, whatever. And it turns out these are cannibals. But you won't let post-apocalyptic cannibals ruin the idea of community, right? You won't let that happen. So don't let churches doing like things that are useful ruin the idea of community for you too. And so there you go. And did anybody see the recent episode? Oh god, whew. That's rough. It's rough. It's rough. Okay, so how can we grow? I hopefully I made the case for why this is important, why this is useful. Where do we need to go? Where do we need to go? So, I wanted to start with an unusually common piece of praise that I get about Sunday Assembly that, doesn't have to be exclusive to Sunday Assembly, but just like, I think is very, very telling, like for two big reasons. It's just simply that we said hello to people who came in. And that screams me two big things. One is, that's what people find important, is to be greeted, to be welcomed in, to have this human connection with someone. And also that apparently a lot of communities are not doing this, which seems like baffling. Like how do you go to an event and no one ever says hi to you? But that happens. That happens all the time. And a lot of communities in the secular world aren't kind of engaging with the people that come in all the time. And sometimes the events are structured in ways where that connection doesn't always happen. And so we lose a lot of people. We lose a lot of people who might be interested, might be engaged, and then just walk away because no one ever talked to them. They came, they sat for a lecture, had a beer, and then they left. Do they ever come back? I don't know, These are people that could maybe have been engaged, and they could have been this integral part of this community if we had just said hi. So these are some thoughts I have about where we might be able to improve and grow in the secular community. And so one of them is, just going off what I just said, a lot of groups are oriented toward discussing atheism, viewing science lectures, and light socializing bars, and that's great. I like all of those things. Those are fine. But that alone doesn't do it. There have to be other kinds of groups. Maybe that same group expands and does other things, but that doesn't suit or fulfill everyone's needs. So, for example, like I know that years ago, that discussing atheism or whatever was happening in politics that was annoying, having to do with secularism, that was super important to me. And over the years, that has become less important to me. And I've changed, and so now my priorities and what I want. Howdy.
I was just speaking.
You can feel free to join us.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's all good. So maybe that was a little strong. I don't know. But that used to be really important to me, and now it's not so much anymore. So people change, right? Viewing science lectures, I love doing that. But like I was saying, it's possible when in those kind of events that you could go into an auditorium, sit down, never talk to anybody, and then leave. And are you any more likely to come back? Are you just there for the science thing and you never learn about this broader secular community? That's kind of a loss. And light socializing at bars, that can do a lot. That's your blowing up steam. That's your building friendships. But there's also a need for a space that's like more quiet and introspective, where you share like that a struggle you're going through, right? That's like super important too. And that doesn't always come across when there's loud music blaring at Emmanuel's Tavern or something, and you're trying to have an intimate conversation. That's not always easy, especially when you're 3 chiefs of the wind. So I think many people are finding enjoyment in secular but service-like events like I was talking about. So again, this is my bias where like this is what I'm seeing and I'm actively involved with. But there are groups like Kansas City Oasis, and I think there's also one in Houston. This is a group that's a lot like Sunday Assembly, and I've been saying, but they do it. I think they do it every week, and I mean I haven't been to one, but like at this Sunday Assembly International Conference last year, the main guy for either Kansas City or I think it was Houston came and kind of explained his philosophy and how we're kind of working towards the same goal. So I consider them to be like natural, mainstream allies. And I also just want to toss out the Unitarian Universalist Church. Like it would be a mistake to like omit them as a part of this conversation, because even though they vary in how much that they actually dabble with the religiosity, some of them, like talk about, hey, Jesus was cool and it's a real story and faith is like a thing we should value, and some of them do less of that. And so like that's not something that I choose to engage with, but a lot of people, when they leave religion, like that might be their first stop. That might be the first place they go to when they're like, I don't know if I buy this Christian thing, or I think I'm not down for Islam anymore. Where am I going to go? I think a lot of people will end up there, and a lot of people in Sunday Assembly, at least, they spend their time doing like some UU church stuff and some stuff with us. Like there's some crossover there, so we can be engaging with them. I guess I'm speaking to myself right now because we aren't engaging with them, like talking to the UU churches very much. Well, except that at least at Sunday Assembly for a year we had our events at a UU church. I guess that's engaging with them. But in terms of engaging with that populace, right? Like that can be, they can be our natural allies too. And again, I think maybe my thesis is already clear right now, but like crucial to like these kinds of events are just having opportunities to get to know people. So, at least at Sunday Assembly things, we have an icebreaker where we get people to talk or work on an activity, and then they get to know people. You got your name tag, so you get to know people. You have a meal afterwards, you get to talk about, what you got out of it, if anything. Or get, find new friends, learn new things, find like, oh, there's all these people in the community, they have these different expertise and skills, and I can call upon them, just like a church community, just like any community. They can help each other in a bunch of different ways. And the last thing I want to talk about is, some unneeded barriers are being brought down, which I think are really positive. So, for a very, very long time, mainstream skepticism, secularism, it's been like a white dude's game, right? If you try to think of the big names in atheism, you think of Dawkins, Harris, you think of Hitchens, right? And that's fine, like, no shade to white guys, right? But, the orientation of some of these events is also kind of geared towards folks like me. And we have not always been catering to the needs of people that are different. So I look at conferences like Skepticon, which takes place in the middle of Missouri, and totally free, by the way. That's another barrier, that it's completely free to go to. You have to get there, right? But the conference itself is free. And then the Secular Student Alliance Conference, which takes place in Columbus, Ohio, where they put a lot of effort into making sure that all sorts of different voices are present in these events. And that's not just like, oh great, now a black person is saying the same things. It's not like that. It's about the topics that they bring up are ones that like I would never think of, and now I'm educated on that. Now I care about that. Now I'm passionate about that. And that broadens the tent, that allows us to work with other organizations. Like the Secular Student Alliance Conference this year, had a lunch sponsored by Planned Parenthood. We are natural allies with groups that care about fighting religious oppression in the form of, restrictive women's health, efforts and stuff like that. Like, we are natural allies with these groups, and they see that, and if we engage with them, we broaden our tent, we build these connections with groups outside of us. That's super crucial, and that only happens when we start to engage with, or bring in different voices that can make us realize, like, oh, there's so much that we can be doing, beyond like what I might think. And then just last, like, I think over the past couple of years, we've gotten more aware of like some members are just not cool, and being more willing to say, no, like you're like actually a bigot and you're dissuading other people from coming. That's a problem that for a long time we were not really engaging with, is you know, if there are jerks in the community, or worse, we need to be willing to say we don't want you here anymore because you dissuade so many other people from coming. And for, you know, a very long time we were not willing to, you know, do that calculus and respect that, you know, some people are being dismissed from our community by not making it as safe, like, and welcoming space in that dimension too. Okay, yeah, I got one last thing, one last slide here. So what can be the benefit of this? I think, so at least on the activism front, right, if we're more visible, if there's more of us, we are more able to, you know, raise our voice when an important issue comes up, right? So I'm pretty sure it was like in the past month, there was a, you know, survey or poll that came out that said the nuns are bigger than, proportionally, than Christians in the US. Now, to be clear, the nuns are atheist and agnostic are like a chunk of that, but most of it are people who just are unaffiliated with a mainstream religion.
So,
right?
deists and...
Yeah, deists, like, nuns could be people who still go to church, they just don't say that they're Christian,
yeah.
right?
Spiritual but not religious.
Yeah, and that's why I put that long list of labels up there, because there's so many different facets, and everyone has, like, there's a different definition for like agnosticism and spiritual for like every single person. So I always need people to define what those mean. But so this community is really, really big, and not everybody is hardcore like, you know, I actively don't believe, or I'm an anti-theist, you know, and that's fine. But, you know, if we can cater to those people who are just kind of like, I'm not into the, you know, the organized stuff, if we can cater to them, then we are like a larger community, and at least on the activism front, we are like a bigger voting bloc that, you know, I guess as we age in, millennials age in to being more frequent voters, and we have more influence, and like positive things can come from that. I think more groups are adopting this post-theism model, and I really like this phrase that I learned from Sunday Assembly people about, like, we all agree that we're like not going to talk about religious stuff, and no one's going to proselytize, and Jesus is not really going to come up, but we're going to do a bunch of other cool stuff. We're not going to focus on that. We're going to go rock climbing. We're going to go play board games. We're going to go meditate. We're going to go to a trivia night, right? Like, these are things that are fun to do, and it's enjoyable to be in a space where you know that that's not going to come up, and it's going to be, you know, just a fun time with people that you know agree on like the most basic stuff. What's up?
So what would be the difference between going to Sunday Assembly or to a hiking group, for example? Because a hiking group is for hiking, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, religion will definitely not come up there just because.
Like, will it though?
I would not be so sure about that.
Yeah.
Like,
really?
Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's like for your hiking example, right? You could totally imagine it. Like, you reach this peak, and you're like, what a beautiful landscape, and then someone's like, look at God's creation, and like that's fine. They are welcome to express that and like feel that, and that's great. But that can kind of like, maybe that, like, to me that would kind of go, oh, okay, I guess we're not feeling this moment in the same way, right? And that there can be a joy in knowing that like the people you're with, you know, are experiencing this in maybe a closer way to you. And it could be just as simple as, it just so happens that there is a secular community that's built, and these are just your friends. You know, it doesn't have to do with, it doesn't always have to do with like, we are going to make sure not to talk about God, but it could just be like, we happen to go to this thing every month, this assembly, you know, this oasis, this whatever, and we hang out and we're friends, and then now we want to do something else, and I just already know them. It could be as simple as that too. Are you stretching? What's up?
Yeah, so also following on to that, a lot of religions do explicitly command people to proselytize. And so you do get a lot of, when those things come up, if they say, oh, look at God's creation, and you just go, uh-huh, they'll catch on to that. Most people are perceptive enough to be like, huh, maybe we should talk about this. And you're like, maybe we shouldn't. And it can make things tense and uncomfortable. But also, along those lines, I do also see there might be some value in these groups for people who are religious but don't want that involved in the things they do.
I think I might have left that part of the conversation, like those people out of this conversation. So thanks for bringing that up, because, for example, like, you can be religious and be a part of like Sunday Assembly 100%, And like, we have religious members, for sure. It's just that once you start proselytizing, you gotta say, that's not what this is for. That's not what we're here for, and we can't have that. But we have religious members, and that's fine. So yeah, like, we need to be creating communities that allow for that as well.
This isn't a secret atheist club for you to infiltrate.
So as an example, I co-ran an event for Sunday Assembly. We have an event every month called Wonder Club, where it's just kind of a philosophy discussion group or just some topic. And I enjoy them. And one of them, the one that I co-ran, was about gaming. Of course, it was about gaming. And we talked about kind of the role that there were a lot of topics that we covered on this, and we definitely didn't get to everything that I wanted to talk about. But there's a lot to talk about on, you know, the artistry of gaming and like the role of gaming in our culture and a bunch of different things. But there was a new guy who came, and I was like, oh, cool, a new guy. And once he learned that we were a non-religious group, he inserted God into the conversation every chance he got.
Oh, man.
It was actually really hard to grapple with, because I'm trying to moderate and say, like, we don't do that, but without being like, please shut up. Like, there's a balance there. It's really tough. So this was to the point where it's actually interrupting our conversation, because he would start talking about Paul. I'd be like, we weren't talking about the Apostle Paul. We were talking about, you know, No Man's Sky. Like we were talking about something. So it was just kind of like, that can kind of, you know, interrupt it, and it's kind of a bummer when it comes up. So it's nice when that doesn't, and we just know, like, okay, we're talking about, you know, there's a Wonder Club happening this Friday about different forms of voting in democracy. Now, I don't know how God would come up in that, but it's nice to know that, like, that interruption, you know, is not intended to ever happen, or at least that, you know, arguments that come from that, like, well, we're a Christian nation, so like that's not going to come up, you know. So I've got my last little point here, which is I wanted to at least talk a little bit about ritual, and I think this goes along with the I don't like that church stuff thing, where I have like a slight aversion to like, oh, let's form rituals and stuff. That seems like, I don't know if I want to do that, and I feel that. But you know, last year at this conference, we had a guy named Ray who lives in New York City. He for the past couple of years, he's created an event called, well, he didn't create the solstice. The solstice is kind of a naturally occurring event, but he created an event called the secular solstice, where, you know, every year people gather together and it's kind of service is the wrong word, but it is an event where there's a lot of metaphor and allegory and ritual in it about, you know, the longest night of the year, and like getting through this really dark period, knowing that it's going to get warmer and brighter, you know, on the other side. That's a naturally occurring, like, beautiful metaphor, right? Let's take that. Let's do something with that. You know, he talked about how like they have music and it like starts high energy and it ends high energy, but it kind of goes down into this part where there's a moment where there's like a single candle, the whole room is dark, and then they blow it out and they sit there for like a minute in silence. You know, like that's not just theater. That's not something we should toss away. That can have like a real and meaningful thing that builds like that could be something you remember for the rest of your life, right? Isn't that something that we would want to have? Just like if you go to like a kick-ass, like, you know, concert, there are moments in that are like really meaningful and resonate, and maybe they aren't trying to be this metaphor. Maybe it's, you know, maybe Jimmy Buffett's just really fun. Like, that's fine too. But let's not eschew that and say like, that's religious stuff, I don't want to do that. Like, we can form rituals that that don't have to feel like corny and hokey, and that can be good.
I think the distinction is that the ritual isn't based on something that you have a faith in, right? The ritual is just about your experience, and that's very real.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the distinction between the rituals that make you feel kind of uncomfortable and not.
Yeah, I agree. And I kind of wanted to mention this silly thing that if none of you probably are aware of this, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of them is called My Brother, and Me. It's a comedy podcast where three brothers accept questions and give terrible advice, and it's always very funny and very positive. And they have they're from Huntington, West Virginia, and they did a live show. They do a live show, I think, every year around the holidays, and they made it this holiday called Candle Nights. And that's them doing one of their live shows, and you can see like in the decorations, it's just this amalgam of like every single holidays things and just all bunched together. And I was listening to this just this week, like their show from 2015, and I found this moment that was really meaningful, surprisingly meaningful for a comedy show, where they wrapped up this candle night celebration thing, where they just say, like candle night says, you celebrate it however you want, it starts and ends whenever you want. It's very loose and silly. But, my computer's turning off. But, nope, we're gonna go back. But, I love the fact that towards the end they said, all right, and as they were pretending like everyone was an adherent to candle nights, and said, as you know, we have one song for candle nights, and we're gonna perform it now, we're gonna sing it in unison. And then one of the brothers gets his guitar out and he strums and he says, starts singing, wasting away again in Margaritaville. And you're like, I can't believe that they're singing Jimmy Buffett, Margaritaville, as if this is like a religious, like, beautiful thing. And then people start singing along, and it's really beautiful and really meaningful. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like actually really good. This is really cool. So I just think like, if we allow ourselves to kind of just lean in a little bit on it, we can have weird moments like that where you can have like a memory, you can have this, they don't have to do that every year, right? But like, to make it a ritual. But it could be like a moment that we can appreciate, and you can make this stuff up too. And that's, that's what all of it is anyway, so.
So that actually, and the name Candle Night reminded me of one of my few favorite rituals from my childhood in Southern Baptist Church that I went to. We would have a Christmas service where they turn off all the lights in the sanctuary, and as you're walking in, they hand you a candle.
Yeah.
And so someone at the front lights a big candle, and then lights up one person's candle,
Yeah.
and they light up the next person, and eventually you have a candlelight service.
Yeah.
And so that's something that easily someone like Sunday Assembly could just pick that and just do it.
Yeah. And
There's nothing religious about candles.
yeah, I think that's really the key, is like, if you remove it from that religious context, you can create what metaphor you want with, like what a candle can represent, or what like lighting, like collectively lighting this thing from one candle, what that can represent. You can decide what that means and build from that what you want. I think there's a lot of meaning to be found from that. I agree. And I think I've done stuff like that too, and you're always avoiding the wax getting on your hands too.
I just let the wax drip all over my hand, and then my hand fuses to the candle. It's pretty neat.
And that's kind of cool too. Like, I like that too. Anyway, so yeah, now's the time for me to stop blabbing. And then I had some like possible discussion things, but if y'all have stuff to say, go for it. But that's all I have.